Okay, that's I hope you all had this good evening. That's got some rest. Today that's we talk about this manuscript preparation, and if you have additional questions still about design, including this, if you are in the stage of the preparation of manuscript or writing up, even not for manuscript, if you have questions, we can discuss after this the first session. So I will start with the question to you guys. Any of you have the experience, actually it's published as the first also or the primary also, a manuscript, an article in English? Okay, you all have some experience. So I hope that's you. Okay, Edward joins just on time. Because you have some experience, I want to ask you, what is the sequence if we talk about this title and a title page, and then as abstract or the introduction or background, methods, results, discussion, acknowledgement, references, and then the other supplementary materials. What's the sequence you prepare your manuscript? If someone can tell.
So,
Alexandra.
Do you mean like how I order it when I submit it, or with the actual
the whole
writing process?
During your preparation.
Okay, so usually I have sort of an outline of what I want to say, depending on whether it's a literature review or writing up the results of something clinical or writing a letter or doing an editorial or whatever it is. I sort of sketch out what I want to say and then the different parts, and then I write, then I plug in the data if I have tables or if I have, other parts of the discussion, and I sort of plug in what I have from the actual research, and then I write the story around it. And then once all of that is done and makes sense, and then I add, the figures and make everything look nice, and then I sort of plug it into the title page that we use for everything, and then adapt as needed with like the target journal, any sort of acknowledgements, conflicts of interest, structured abstract, that kind of thing, ethics approval. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share this general approach when you prepare your manuscript? Anyone want to share?
Yeah, I think the most important is to have the idea what you are going to do. As she said, are you going to have a literature review? Are you going to have interventional study? And who will join you? Who is your team? Are you going to work as sole author, or you have a team who can support you in the conceptual framework or something like this? And the most important for me is to work with a team who can understand you, who can collaborate with you and not give you all the work to do it by yourself, and then just give you some comments or something like my supervisor. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
You shouldn't have my supervisor in your team.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't know if anyone else want to share that. I found this very interesting pattern, at least this for the students I supervised and all this other general this approach. They submitted, even during the discussion, they submitted the entire thing. They started with the title and have a title, and then write abstract, and then write the introduction and the background and the methods, and according to the sequence of the article itself. So, and then until this endpoint with reference or this kind of thing. That's definitely is not the sequence, I can tell you. it cannot be like that. There's so usual sequence of this, we are talking now about this based on this original data collection and research. It's not about this systematic review or the literature review or later. It's about original manuscripts we're talking now. So the usual process, we should start with the results. You should prepare your tables, the figures first. And the usual situation, you have a lot of data. Yesterday we talked about this. Many of you have already collected a lot of data or you plan to collect data. Data just very rich. So usually that's when you have a PhD project, you're aiming for a number of manuscripts. So it's not only one. So it can have 2 or 3. That's for my PhD. I was asked to submit, to publish at least 4 articles before I can be qualified to send my thesis to the committee for the review. Otherwise, I cannot be qualified even. It's quite different. That's in US and in Europe, that's quite different. And also university have different requirements. So come back to the data. You have a lot of data. So also in your research proposal, you have your hypothesis. So yesterday we talked about this. One research should be able to solve one issue. But according what I listened to you, I heard from you, you always have multiple, have a primary and then have secondary objectives. You also collect data, try to serve that purpose. So that actually presents the opportunity, you can have multiple manuscripts prepared. So for one specific manuscript, you cannot put all the data in one manuscript. You need to select those most relevant to one hypothesis or this one objective for that. So usually the journals will tell you that each journal got its own requirements. That's their own requirements. Always can be up to 5 tables or figures together. That's the usual theme. Others usually they have less. And now that's become a general trend. When this electronic version become available, you can put your tables and the figures become supplementary. So called S table 1, S figure 1, that kind of thing in the results. So again, this tables and this figures, and sometimes you can use map also. That's to that in the GIS map of the tiered. There's approach to have layers of information in one map in order to tell some kind of story. All the results he presented are helping you to tell the story, to test your hypothesis. We should have more than enough. We should not have more than enough information in the results. And on the other hand, we should have enough information to tell the story, to test the hypothesis. So the right level of information in the results is the first step. And the results should be presented in a way with the reasoning already there. If you want to have different layers of information, probably you have your table 1 or figure 1, that's overall situation about this. And then the table 2 and table 3 will dig into specific thing, a subset of this information evidence, or you want to do some disaggregate analysis by whatever the parameters, you want to do that. And then if you want to even dig further to some kind of association or this causal inference and then try to strengthen argument. So that's something. Also, in some cases, you need to describe your implementation results at the first part of your results. For example, I designed what I supposed to have 500 individuals, and in the results, I will describe actually this implementation happened during this period of time with this amount of the individuals involved, with this data collected, and that kind of thing. This can be the first part of the results. So when results is done, and I would encourage you as a PhD candidate, you discuss these tables and the figures or the results with your supervisor at this moment. So you need to tell your supervisor, say, these are the results I collected and how I analyze this, and this is what the message I want to convey through these tables and figures, and get agreement and or comments from your supervisor, say this is the right level of information and right way to present this before you go to other sections of manuscript. Usually the supervisor should be able to provide some valuable input to this process, and that will help you. Don't jump into other sections before you finalize, because that will save you a lot of time. It's not one more meeting with your supervisor. It's not delaying the process. Actually, will save more time in the further steps. Okay, after you have done this results, then this next section is about results and method. It's about methods, subjects and methods. So it depends on the journal and also depend on this research nature of your project. So some journals called methods, just that's it, and some called methods in the subjects. And some of this may have the other terminology. Basically, it's around the methodology of this. When you have the results done already, so you already know how you collect the data, right? So that's which subjects you include in this research, what are the inclusion, exclusion criteria, and where you implement this, and who collect the data, and how you collect the data, what are the methods for this quality control, quality assurance during this implementation, and also this, what are the statistical methods you used for this. And in most of the journals, you need to describe this ethical approval or ethical review, IRB or anything in this section. Some journals that may have different sections to describe that, but most of journals will ask you to describe that in this. So one common mistake is the student just copy what they included in the proposal to this section. I would not encourage that at all, because we are talking about specific subset of the results. It's not about entire research project. You need to really talk about this whole all this data, including the results section, how that the methodology around that. In this case, that's when you describe the statistical methods, you usually need to tell this which software you use. We talked about R yesterday, and SPSS or this other method, or SAS, there's the other statistical methods. You will need to indicate the company, and that people will find, because when this published and when you have your affiliation, people will check, actually your organization, this affiliation, have the license for that software. People will check. So make sure, if you do not have that, the University of Geneva may have that, so that all the other co-authors may have that license. It's very tricky. So you must, for any laboratory methods, you need to describe exactly this reagent, what's the knot number of that reagent, which are the manufacturer for that, so that any diagnosis or laboratory, so you need to describe in detail for that. And when you have statistical, this complicated thing is you need to describe detail here also. So, and also yesterday we talked about this missing data. So how we address missing data usually need to be addressed here. So in the methodology, how you replace or input that's all this kind of the ways that you did that during your results generation. So that is the results section. Results section should not be long. Now I would say in usual that's manuscript is 1 page. We're talking about A4. That's doing manuscript. It's 1 page, unless you really have the content very complicated, involve a lot of data collection tools and also the methods into laboratory statistics, or unless you have this very complicated. Otherwise, I will limit that into can be very concise, and it don't need to be like very complicated, because people will not like to know that something is not necessary to help people to understand the results, how all the data collected. Okay, after this results section down, and then we go to introduction or background. So in the introduction or background, depending on the journal, so we usually have 1.5 pages. So the A4, if we use this the font 11 or 12, that kind of thing. Don't make trick this with this font. The font always, this journal will have specific requirements on that. So don't play with that. So 1.5 pages for that. So usually a few paragraphs in this introduction or background. So the first thing is we describe what are the general terms of the overview of the issue you want to solve. For example, Alexandra, you said this hand sanitation as all this environmental sanitation, why that is important? Why still is important subject? I think the important is why it's still important subject. People always understand this, always when we try to write, always the important issue. And people may not feel that, but you need to describe that in the very first paragraph. And the second paragraph, you will need to tell this, and where you situate this, maybe a global problem. You want to situate into the context where you were going to do the research. So, for example, you may do that's global, and I want to have a representative sample in Africa, Asia. Why I want to do that? Because in Asia, it's still a big problem. And Africa it's improving, but it's still a big problem, or something around that. It situates that into something that's localized. Maybe I would say we situate in Haiti for the TB, and globally TB is a problem, but in Haiti is something still. And maybe that's related to the subject that you're going to describe, like the treatment outcome, that's maybe this in the region still a problem, and also historical data we still have problem. The third paragraph is more like this: what are the remaining issues related to this subject? So remaining, so that's always we try to solve something not resolved yet, or that something is very inconclusive. So although someone did this, did that, but because of this and that, we cannot have conclusions for this specific subject. So that's why we want to do this. So in that section, in that paragraph, you need to automatically, with description of these issues, all this kind of thing, why we do it, and lead to that, what this hypothesis you want to test. in this you want to test, all state your objectives here about this manuscript. What the problem you want to solve, what the issue specifically you want to solve in this manuscript. And then this last paragraph is more like, so we conducted this research, where doing that, so I try to this. So in that kind of overall structure, and you have this 1.5 page. So you will see that actually this introduction or background involves a lot of reading. So you really need to understand this overall picture and a specific issue for this, and how you can tear down from this big issue to be something small, and may not be small, that's specific for something, and then have this good understanding about this specific issue, that's where we are globally, and then this whole, that's actually this hypothesis will come up. So it's the introduction, and so we talk about the results, methods, and the introduction in this direction, okay? And then after introduction, you go for discussion. Discussion, that's people that's made this, a lot of people actually make mistake. This after results section, they immediately go to discussion, because they want eager to summarize something that's there. It's not, because that's closely like linked with introduction part. What do you want to solve in the introduction part, and you will be able to address in the discussion part. So those two pieces should be logically linked. It cannot have this introduction part talking about one thing and discussion talking about the other thing. So that kind of manuscript will be easily rejected. So and there's all the manuscripts should be logic, this one body, should be logically linked to the different pieces. So in the discussion, usually we talk about 2 pages on that. 2 pages. Some discussion can be very long, but for the usual study, like 2 pages would be enough. And we have a few sections, subsections in the discussion section. The first paragraph, very first paragraph, usually you need to state what's most important finding from your research, and why is that so important. So this first paragraph usually very short, but this depends on the style. Some journals can have very long paragraph for the first paragraph, but I would suggest make this very straightforward, highlighted your most important finding. The second paragraph is about other important findings. For example, we use Alena's research project. Just imagine in the future, you already have data, already have that. So all findings indicate the negative attitude towards life, towards death, is strongly associated with COVID infection. So that is most important finding. Why that is important? Because in the introduction part, you already said you want to test this hypothesis. No, with the very first sentence, I already say I approve. Or in other way, I disapprove this hypothesis. So that's the most important finding. And then the second paragraph is about other important findings. It can say we find this positive, this attitude actually associated with other factors also, the way they're living the life, that's physical activity, health-seeking behavior, all this kind of thing. That's in that second paragraph. So that's also important. That's very important finding also. And the third paragraph or fourth paragraph, usually we try to strengthen our argument. strengthen our argument. We have different ways to strengthen our argument. When we say this first conclusion or second paragraph about other important findings, some kind of conclusion, it's not a conclusive way, just state the fact. In order to argue that this finding is very good and all the best in the world, and we need to compare with other studies, similar studies. So other similar studies, you will compare. One is this: are there any similar studies or exact same kind of design and same subject studies? What they're finding. So if there's consistent with that, we can really just use that to strengthen all that. Actually, we're consistent. Our findings are consistent with the others. With this also, that also, that said this, that. Even you can quote some of that, and in many cases, you can have these findings not consistent with your finding. That part also very important. Don't discard any of that, because peer review will find. Yeah, the peer review, even as their own researchers, the projects, their own articles, you will see that in some kind of this reviews that someone suggests that you cite this article. It's very common. You cite this article. Why? Because they feel it's not their article, but they feel the finding is very important. You omit that. Or this is their own research project. So don't be afraid of this others' contradictory findings. State that. State the fact that there's a finding or that, but you need to have a little bit additional work. To look at the methodology, are there any fraud in the methodology? Either the sample size is not good enough, or this analysis for that is a problem, or that's not optimal, or other methodological issues, including definition of eligibility. These common issues. So they include that group. The eligibility is different from mine. Why mine is more appropriate. So that kind of, and all this the statistical methods, although they have good findings, but they apply this not really the best statistical approach. So that's because during the reasoning process, so they jump to a different conclusion. So for that, all this the other thing is common finding this. You have different levels of association. So some you have your association is stronger or weaker than the other studies. So you also need to reason that. I think this, as I said yesterday, this sample size always a big factor for this. When you have a larger sample size, you can always find the association, but this at low level. And when you have the short, like the smaller sample size, and all the other things about this, especially during this exposure and outcome, do they have enough time to have effect on the outcome? So all these other aspects like dose response and other things in that. So the third paragraph, usually we have 2 paragraphs and at least 1 paragraph about that, 2 or 3 paragraphs, try to compare this and that. That's about your findings and with others. And also that's some about the different study designs also in this paragraphs. You may have a cohort study, and also the other may have a cross control, a case control or cross sectional. So that's different design, but measure the same thing. So because it's different design, they try to solve this the issues in different ways. So that also the part of that. So that's people will have some kind of difference. So that can be discussed also there. So of that section, so about comparison, just keep in mind, all this comparison is about strengthen your argument. It's not about this praise or criticize others. It's not about that. That's not point. The point is about strengthen your finding, your argument. So that's very important to keep in mind. Then next section, people usually don't like that, but I value that very much. It's about your limitation, your study limitation. For example, yesterday we talked about this using existing data people already collected. So that data, you cannot do much. That's the limitation. That's the boundary you can go. And you cannot go beyond that. That's otherwise you need to create a new study. So that kind of thing. And you may have this some bias and foresee, you can foresee already, or you already know that the bias, like information bias, recall bias, and social desirability bias. So we talk about that during this EPI course. So those bias should be clearly indicated in this. And also that's some kind of like errors, this implementation. We did not achieve predefined sample size. So that kind of thing, that's we need to state that. You state that, it makes this obvious, and people, peer review will like that actually. And but that's not end of story yet. So instead limitation, it's not like you want to say this, my research is rubbish. No, that's not that. Against all these limitations, what you have done, you need to say something. You make some corrective measures, and or during this analysis or during this data checking, and I did something, try to minimize this impact of these limitations. At the end of the day, remember, we still want to strengthen our argument, because this at the end of that section, I would say, despite of all those limitations, we have done this. I still believe this kind of data are useful and can be used and can be. So that kind of tone should be the last sentence of that limitation section. So you will need to say something around that. Cannot just conclude that section with just limitations. That will expose you to this very bad comment. Then usually we put in one section, or let's have a separate section. The next one is about strength of your design of your data and of that. So a lot of things you can describe here. That's I think this basically is not to offset all the limitations, but this really put this argument into a different perspective. Say this, although we have limitations, but we do have some strength here. That's with this, and this whole this kind of strength in your study actually strengthen the argument, and you have for what you described in the very first and the second sections in discuss paragraph in the discussion section. So after that, then you can now talk about some kind of conclusions. So, and in summary or in conclusion and this kind of sentence, and then you have this basically describe very concisely about your conclusion and on this. And then usually that's we talk about, because we're talking about global health, and what are the implications of the findings for global health. And many of you talk about the public health recommendations, guideline, or this kind of thing. So the implication of your findings in that section, in the conclusion section. Or some articles may say that I have a lot of implications from my findings, may have a different paragraph for that. And it's not very common for this, but some articles do indicate in the very last paragraph about indication for the future researchers, similar research. So I have done this. These are the remaining area will need to be further explored, further research, studied, that kind of section. Okay, so we have this main body of the manuscript done already up to this point. And with this, we have already done this references. I will encourage you to use this software to, because this you will change the order of that. That's, you don't want to name every time every version. You need to find a way to do that. So I think you are smart enough to do that. So by this time we already have this references done. So I will talk about references. That's but I will come later. Now it's the time for you to go back to write the abstract. It's a totally mistake if you write abstract before you write entire manuscript. And all this kind of findings and all methods, all this kind of thing. Now with all the sections done, you can summarize really about that. So I would encourage you, I would suggest you actually that after you have done your discussion section, before you do your abstract, have a discussion with your supervisor. So I said 2 time points, one after results, because that is critical. And then after this entire manuscript done, you have a conversation with your supervisor, talk about that. And it's good to have this kind of face-to-face, even virtually, have this kind of discussion. Instead, just send. Of course, you need to send first for supervisor to have a read, but it's good not just through email communication. That will miss a lot, actually, this message, because this what you want to express in the writing may not be conveyed quite well in the writing. So it's good that you talk to your supervisor. There's something that I want to talk in this section, and supervisor may offer you a very good advice. Let's say that can be done differently, or this part can be moved, or this kind of reorganized in a way that can be done. So and then we talk about this abstract. The abstract usually have 2 ways to do that. One is called structured. The other one is not structured. It depends on the journal. But usually they have a few sections here. So this abstract that will ask you to include 1 sentence about backgrounds. Some may not. Some will go straight to the objectives. And it depends on the journal. And then you need to have method section and the results section, and then have some kind of conclusion. There's no discussion, but this. So the conclusion, and if this in a non-structured way, you need to describe in a way like this, but depend on this the word limit. Usually all the journals got the word limit, 250, 350, 450, 500. So depend on the journal. And some that's very strict, that's 200 only. So into this very much effort. Usually it's not difficult to write long abstract than the short one. Usually we have a lot to write instead of have this to make this really concise. So the tricky part for this, make your results section very, very concise. Even you have a lot about this. Remember, in your discussion section, you have first paragraph, second paragraph. And I will start with the first paragraph, most important findings, with that in abstract. And then if you feel like it can summarize the secondary findings, the other most important finding in a few sentences, very short, and then you can include that. Otherwise, I will focus on the most important thing. Then after the abstract, we talk about title. We cannot come with title first. And then it's already, now they come with title, the title can be descriptive. And this is about this study at a randomized clinical trial or this kind of thing. And it's very descriptive. And some journals have the kind of word limits about this length, about this title. Some that's maybe more flexible. But I would think this, I don't encourage this long title. Long title that's make people like crazy. That's really, unless that's you have really different sections can clearly distinguish this part is finding and this method, that's kind of thing. That's a the other way to frame this title is put your major finding, this most important finding, if you can summarize in one sentence as the title. I would encourage that actually. If you have that title, make this very attractive that people already know from very beginning reading your title, and then you can make this title more like a sexier. That's a make this title. That's a don't need to be like boring. This boring part is always descriptive. It's very boring. It's look like very scientific, but the people when read that and if you want to hit this headline or this kind of thing, usually this use most important finding as a title will make your article easier hit the timeline. Hit this. I do have the students like say physical activity modifies the relationship between these. Like this is most important finding of this article, and people will clearly get that by reading the title. And then it's after title, and you need to have acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is very important part of the article. And it clearly states who those contribute to your research, but not listed as author or co-authors, the funding sources to support your research, and also even the participants of your research, and that all in acknowledgement. All the organizations that support you in the process in any aspect, any step, like from the design, implementation, data collection, even help you do the analysis, even sometimes that's especially for the non-English speaking authors, have someone proofread and improve the language, and all this kind of thing should be acknowledged. And if you have a funding or grant, that you need to indicate the grant number and a funding source in here in the acknowledgement. And I will talk about that the authors later on. This in the reference. So that people, as journals may have specific requirements of number of references. People tend to have more references because especially for PhD, we read a lot. We have our own this compilation of articles, all this kind of thing. We have a lot. So it's easy to have more than enough references. For the reference, this one thing is very important to strengthen your argument. Give the background, the methodology, and then this similar studies, and all this. When the peer review look at that, and we'll see that's okay. Actually, you have done proper review of everything for that before you write up or during your write up already. So give this review or peer review that's impression, we have done all the relevant literature review. and everything I supposed to know already included in the here. And also that's have the style for this journal. That's they have different ways of naming, ranking, and all this. Actually, there's some journals say the first 3 authors, some say the first 5, first 6, and some that need to indicate all authors, and some have different ways put the year and the page number, or even this now they have this others link DOI, others must be included. I think the tricky part is for grade literature. There's a grade literature, usually they have different ways of requirements. Make sure that you don't make mistake in that section, because that can be an issue. That's even some journals, this editors can be very strict. You must follow exactly that's what they require. Otherwise, they may reject that at that place. Say this, please go back and do that again. So that actually does waste a lot of time instead of saving time. Then as we come back to, we have a page this during the submission, we have got this title page. Title page, usually we have, it depends on the journal also, again, some journals will not let you show the authors. Some journal ask you to show authors and other things. So a title, a shortened title. So many journals ask you to have a shortened title, just a few words, a phrase for that. So that some journals actually print that the shortened journals on the article. And then it's about authors. It's important to have authors. I hate the gift authors. So that's give someone because it's your supervisor or not your PhD supervisor, your at a work, your boss, and then as gift, that's people may not contribute at all, that may not be qualified. Each journal actually they have their own way of qualifying authors or co-authors in an article. And also the sequence of the author, that's everyone to be the first author, or there's and of course the PhD supervisor should be this correspondence author, the senior one. So that they cannot change. And for that, the other authors probably this you make this more flexible to have people really help you. Of course, you need to be the first author as part of your PhD. And it's that flexible to be the joint first authors with someone who really contribute, and without that person, probably your research project cannot be possible even. Some kind of that contribution, or that the person really help you to do the analysis and all this kind of thing. And it's good to have those authors on the list that actually that's when you use existing data, that's existing this research project. Of course, you need to get consent from them to use their data. And also it's always safe to have those people, at least one that's in a co-author list, and later on you will not have issue with that. Because the access of data and at the time of submission of the publication, you may not have problem. Later on, you may have problem. And always some kind of argument may happen later on. So this kind of and then the authors usually they have different kind of way of naming and with this kind of footnote or something, and this 1, 2 or AB or ABC or different ways, and provide this contact information for correspondence authors, and then you usually ask you to have some kind of what the word count of words for abstract for the main body, and even some journal ask you how many references here in the title page, and because especially for journal with this kind of requirements for the word count, you need to clearly indicate that. If more than that, then you have problem. if less than that within the limit, you are safe. And then also this number of tables and figures also indicated here in the title page. So that is a manuscript. It's about this. I hope this process and help you. And after this, I will spend like about 20 minutes talk about submission and address this peer review comments. So I will talk about that. So at the moment, do you have any questions around this? I hope this experience actually help you. That's in preparation of your manuscript. Isa.
Yeah, one of the things that I find very difficult is to decide what. Sometimes it's difficult to what to put in the introduction and what in the discussion, especially when it comes to references or because maybe some key research that is related, you also want to discuss in relation to your findings, but then it's also important to put it in the background. Do you have any advice on how to triage between the?
Yeah, there's a big difference between introduction and discussion. It's a big difference. Introduction is to lead you to state the hypothesis and objective. Everything is information about the big picture overall, and there's some localization of your that issue is to lead to the hypothesis you are going to test. So that's the introduction. For discussion, it's all about this strengthen your argument based on your research. So some that you made this cite exactly same article for that. But in the introduction part, you will say this I kind of research already some kind of done, but still some inconclusive on this. So that's why we need to do this research. In the same article, in the discussion part, this is a clear limitation for that study why our findings are inconsistent. Or this why our findings are consistent because they adopt this larger sample size, good design, or this kind of thing. So that's no actually straightforward answer, but these two parts are different. You cannot have the same language in the same two different sections. Any other questions at this stage? And okay, if now that's Robbie, you want to say something? Or?
Yeah. Professor, I think the most difficult part is also to follow each journal requirements. There are many of these journals, and as you said, each journal has its own requirement. But at the end of the stage, okay, I finished my manuscript and I need to submit my manuscript. But I get surprised that if, for example, if I have 4 tables or 5 tables for my literature review, the journal requests only to submit 1 table. And sometimes they request to recommend some peer reviewers. And to be honest, sometimes who can I recommend? Who can be qualified to review my article? So this also some difficulties I faced before. Thank you.
So that is common issues during submission. So the first thing, when you finish the discussion section, before you write up the abstract, during your discussion with your supervisor, so you may ask advice, or you can suggest a few journals you want to submit and discuss with your supervisor. The usual way, that's with my students, I always say this as 3 journals we want to target. We'll try this first. And if that fails, we try this one. and then that one. So that's always, we try that kind of thing. But there's after your discussion with your supervisor, you should follow the journal requirements for the first journal. That's you guys agree on that. And then that's for the peer reviews, probably your professor, your supervisor, maybe is more familiar with this network in this. People's human nature just will ask this, people work together, knew each other's research area as a peer review. That's totally acceptable. And people that's most likely will like this kind of opinion and this kind of finding. This, this scientific research always have something that people may not agree. So that's always. So that is suggested reviewer. And some journals ask you to suggest not to submit to some of these reviewers, potential reviewers. You can also discuss, not because of the people's a strong opinion against certain finding will kill you. Don't let that happen. So that's also fair. That's the other thing that's you can do during your literature review. You're already familiar who are those big people in this research area, in this area. So you can always list those people as the peer reviewer. That's so again, discuss with your supervisor and on that, then make the best case for that. And the journal may decide if they use your suggested peer reviewers. They do have their own decision in the process. They may use that, may not use that, depending on totally their own decision on that. Okay, let me now start with the submission so submission it's a painful process. It's very painful. So there's all this, you need to, before you submit, you need to read these requirements very carefully, including labeling, footnote, that kind of thing. This all the details. You are the one. Don't expect your supervisor to come later on correct something. That's very bad. you give your supervisor very bad impression for that. So do that yourself. Read carefully. Try to make everything actually according to the journal requirements. Prepare some kind of 6 months. If you have a timeline says, I want to graduate, I want to get published, prepare at least 6 months from your submission to the publication, at least 6 months. No, I can understand, even including myself, I may not review because I receive a lot of journals ask me to peer review this, that. I got so many other things I may not be able to prioritize this. And also this, at myself, I always try to read carefully about the manuscript. I don't want to say just go or not go. That the kind of thing is not responsible. That's I want to read. If there's any peer review, want to read carefully and need to, usually I do that in the evening. Quiet time and read carefully. And also I treat this as a kind of learning process. I learned through the peer review. And a lot of things that actually not published, I already know the findings. That's the beautiful part. That's why I want to be the peer reviewer. Alexandra.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I had a question. Have you found that I think because of COVID probably and everything, that the quality of the peer reviewers that you're getting has dropped? Because I've seen that with a lot of the articles that, not a lot, I'd say maybe 30% of the articles that we've submitted, that sometimes you get these reviews back and they're just really substandard. They're not in agreement. It's one sentence, this is great, or another sentence, here's the issues, and you can tell they don't know the literature, they haven't read the paper. And it's been really sort of frustrating. How do you, have you seen that happening recently, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I must admit, yes, that is a trend I saw also. That's unfortunately it happening like that. I can see this level of anxiety among peer reviewers, and I'm in different journals in the committee. That's and recently I had this journal committee meeting, and that this peer review the quality. And although they don't claim that as a journal, they don't want to claim that the quality is going down. But during the discussion, we can clearly feel that people may not really spend time to have careful review and provide meaningful comment in not for the authors to improve. So the peer review process is actually, for my understanding, is to help the authors to improve the manuscript. The first thing is, of course, into make judgment that's it's suitable for this journal, or this quality good enough to be published on this journal. And if you feel like really something, this manuscript can be improved and later on can be published, then you should be responsible, make some kind of comments that later on can be used by author to really improve the quality of manuscript.
But I was wondering if we can, I mean, I feel like part of the responsibility is on the part of the journal, because I've been asked to peer review articles that are just not at all in my field of expertise. And I'm sure that everybody here has had that same experience. And I mean, I'm sorry, but these journals, ever since COVID, I realize they have a high workload, but at the same time, we're working for free in exchange for prestige. The universities are paying for our time. The journals have higher profit margins than Google or Apple. I mean, I started looking into it at one point for some project we were doing on fake news, and like Elsevier, it's insane. So I feel like maybe this could be like, I mean, it's idealistic, but maybe this could be some sort of like a tipping point for the scientific community to sort of expect a certain level of behavior from the journals, because they're the ones that are making a lot of money on this. And at the very least, their behavior shouldn't be making our lives that much harder, kind of.
So that's related to the journal selection. There's one trend since PROS, and there's other series of journals, and this become a business. That's, to be honest, yes, that's also the factor. That's the journal that's publishing has become a business, and during COVID, because of a lot of peer reviewers that's not available, that don't want to do this, and then they approach others. I'll receive a lot of junk emails from everywhere. Either ask me to submit, to cite my old article, say, could you submit another similar thing, or there's a book chapter, or there's something, a lot. And also there's a lot of requests for peer reviewing. Is totally not my area at all. And that's kind of thing. What I can do, just ignore that, just delete that. So, and that as an individual, that's not much we can do. But there's for this, the public, there's especially the peers, that's probably can do something in not to change this kind of environment. And that cannot be easy when it's money driven. And so actually, I want to talk now about this journal selection. That's we do have journals. We understand that when we read all this literature, we already know what in this field, what the most important journal that's. And if you submit to this, it's kind of recognition of your finding of your research, and all that's will be, you expect your peers and others will read your article, and that's most likely that your findings will be disseminated. That's and people will read that. That is most important thing for us. And the second thing that we'll consider is the impact factor. That's we cannot avoid that, but the impact factor that's I would put in the second criteria for consideration. The first thing is target this, because we as PhD we always have a specialized area. when you have specialized area, just target on those journals. There's more. There's you find most relevant article on, and then as we can expect this wide citation. And later on, I will see that. Impact factor. It's a complicated thing. There's some journals really have the way that they know how to do this. There's a lot of tricks because I'm sitting on committee and the journal do have some kind of thing that's to increase the impact factor, because when there's a formula, people can always play with the formula to come with impact factor. That's people, we all understand that's how all the tricks. I would not encourage you to submit this specialized article to like more generic journal. That will help you find it's like really submerged. This something this of course the people can search still, but this when it's do not, I believe that people still trust more on the specialized journal for specific area professionally. So again, that's I talked earlier. Let's discuss with your supervisor and have a few on the list for each article. Try the first one, and usually when let's try this first one, that's either high impact or there's because journal usually they're published on that. That's what the turn over time. There's so that's when from this submission to the first like a comment from this journal editor, that's what the usual time that's for that. You need to calculate that for your graduation or for that kind of thing. So don't submit that journal. They don't indicate that time. When they don't indicate that time, it's not a good indication. So usually they have longer period of time from the first submission for any further decision. So then let's go for online. During the submission, to make sure that you do not have any mistake or that's missing anything in that during the first submission. Otherwise, people may not immediately look at your submission. And after a few days, look at your submission, there's some small errors and push back, you need to submit again, and unnecessary delay by 1 week, 2 weeks. So that's all the tricks. So after that, you will receive either immediate rejection. Okay, that's not bad news. Okay, don't treat that very bad. Maybe you're a little bit disappointed, but that's not end of word at all. So a lot of this have a lot of articles, very important articles, and even as I found very good articles got rejected. That's totally depend on this peer reviewer. Or the second thing is you have a major revision or minor revision of your manuscript. So that is really good news, very good news for you. I did not see any manuscript submit without any revision requests and published directly. No, that's no. So you always have a revision when they said come back, and always like sentence this: we cannot publish your article at it is now, and we do have suggestions from peer reviews. These are the points that's for that. So now I want to talk about how we address peer reviewers' comments here. Yeah. You have a manuscript and the draft, and then you have a cover letter. During your submission, your cover letter is also important. You need to indicate this. It should be very concise, this cover letter, and it's good to get the agreement with your supervisor. Usually, it's your supervisor as the correspondence also have that to sign that letter. And during the revision, and you have two pieces to prepare. One is the cover letter. Cover letter at the very beginning, try to be nice. Try to use the positive tones to place some editorial office comments and peer reviews comments. Say this, your comments are so important that we'll actually will greatly improve the quality of that kind of thing. That's make this tone. And I do have a lessons learned. I can tell you, one of my PhD project, one chapter actually, I submit to the British Journal of Nutrition. They give me back this revision, all the comments. And unfortunately, that lessons I learned. My professor died at that time already. And I become the one I need to respond and everything. If my professor would have not died, I think that we'll publish that article. But with mine, because especially I graduated already with my PhD, that's the feeling I told you, that I'm the #1 in this field. I know everything. So I was a little bit nasty in responding. So that's something even argue with the peer reviewer. So arguing. And after I submit my cover letter for the revision, got immediate rejection from editorial office. So that is clear the lessons learned. So that's because of that. That's myself. I feel that I don't need this article anymore. So after that, I never submit again. So that's just died. So be nice to the editor, and because peer reviewer may have access to your cover letter on that. The second thing is you need to provide point-to-point response. Really to the point. So, for example, some that's peer reviews may be very detailed, ask you to delete one word, to change one comma, to change this and all the reference here. You need to follow exactly. And always say something like, okay, this is great. I may change accordingly. That's a very good comment, and I address this here. That's very important. Okay, it's not about that, because the people as peer reviewer, we always like to see that kind of comment, right? We just think from the other side. And then you need to have document everything you revise in the manuscript. Many of the journals ask us which page, which line, or which lines, and you say, thank you for this comment. I made revisions on that page from line, this line to that line. And even sometimes you can quote that revision in the cover letter. Say these are the points I made, and then have this when you have this all this, because a lot of comments related to table or figures, I want to change the way that you or sometimes they ask us, some peer reviewers the ridiculous ask you to redo this kind of table or figure the way they like. So that's also sometimes it happens. So I would suggest you do that and make all the necessary. And then in a concluding sentence for the cover letter, I had a cover letter that's more than 10 pages, because this comments, I had one article, 7 reviewers, 7 reviewers, and all the reviewers that have very detailed comments. So I have all this kind of comments then addressed and document that the cover letter itself is more than 10 pages. And the concluding sentence, and I will talk about that exactly. Okay, in the concluding sentence, and I will say that we hope that we addressed all your comments, and some kind of, if you cannot address some of the comments, well, we document that this remaining comments, that's we don't agree, because we feel this. And all this, we could not address this because our finding will not be enough. Because usually the peer review may ask for additional information that you did not collect at all. So those message and that comment you cannot address. So that's I will leave that, but I will state clearly in my cover letter. These are the points I cannot address. These are the points I cannot agree based on this and that. But to be honest, in the cover letter, try to really minimize the point you disagree. Of course, that's just follow the science, follow the facts. That's of course on that. But just if possible, if not really jeopardize your major finding, I don't argue. I would not argue with that because that some minor thing that people may feel like this should be respected and all this kind of thing, and I would not go with that. This peer reviews are a very diverse group, very diverse. People have different views, different personality, and detail, and high level, and different perspectives. I would not go into that kind of context and run into arguments with them. So, and each round of the revision, and some articles may go several rounds of revision. So each round of revision may take a few months. Instead of leave room for the peer reviewers to have additional comments, and they have another round of review, and why we cannot address that even in the nice way. That's we can, if we can address that, why not? So when you send that kind of thing together with your track changed manuscript itself and a clean version. So usually submit 2 versions. So track change is to be consistent with what you documented in the cover letter, and a clean version is for someone to read, that's whatever. So I submitted all of this, including that the tables, figures, and then may submit separately in the submission system. And with revision clearly labeled, and this is revised version, this the track change version, this clean version, this the table is revised, this kind of thing, this, and then submit the revision. This you can see that already I feel painful. That's when I describe this, because that's went through so many processes like this. Alexandra.
If I can just share an anecdote that I really, really agree with you that it gets bad quickly when you offend the reviewers or the editors. I had one, so I was working on a book chapter with my advisor, and there was one of the peer reviewers, like, again, half the comments weren't great, but the last comment was like, please have this, and it was written in really bad English, and the last comment was, please have this reviewed by someone who speaks English fluently. And I took it super personally. And I just wrote back, thank you for your comments, but I'm a native English speaker, and why would you write something like this in broken English? And I took it really personally. That guy made my life hell for like 3 months. Like every single thing that they could make difficult was difficult. I was ready to throw the chapter away. I don't even know how it got finished in the end, but it was the worst experience. So I feel like no matter what they're saying, they just have these egos, and you just go along with it if it doesn't ruin your research. And yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing this. This is kind of typical example. Some minor things may bother you. I would suggest don't let this kind of thing bother you, because what do you want to achieve? To get your major findings published. It is your major findings that's most important, relate to your hypothesis. That one is most important. I do have this kind of similar comments in my co-author list, especially when I have a native English speaker or any speakers on the co-authors list, I say, you are responsible for the English language. You must read carefully to remove any error, the grammar or the spelling or this kind of thing. It's your responsibility. But even after that, we still receive this, please have a native English speaker to review this. Or this, okay. What I can say is, okay. Usually I say something toward that comment, say, we have another native English speaker had another round of reading. That already, I don't think these people will go back to check again. That's the tricky part. That's very interesting. Okay, after this revision, as I said, you may have several rounds of revision, but I would encourage you to thoroughly address all the comments and think about this, because you will be the one, it's not your supervisor. You will be the one to unpack, to study all this kind of comments and provide prepared responses. And your supervisor, if that's really responsible, will look at the detail. And if that's not busy, and then we just let it go. And then become final product to the journal. So try to minimize the number of revisions. And so usually that's when they ask for revision, usually they will publish that. But this multiple revisions will delay. That's annoying also. And especially for you guys, you have full-time job, you have a lot of other troubles in your job, that then for this detailed reading, you need to really have quiet time and need to go through details again. Each revision is another writing, it's another round of writing. So try to, and if you submit that and then the journal said, and congratulations, that's we want to inform you of good news and usually the language, then I congratulate you now at this moment. And still not end of yet this yet. So, and then as the journal will submit you as proofreading. And you will need to read carefully. Don't trust any journal that will put in the format of journal format exactly what you revised. Not. You need to read carefully, because at this stage, nobody cares about content anymore. You are the one care about the content that will be published. So you need to read carefully. That's any omission, that's misspelling, that's it happened to me. That's the entire paragraph got missed. So that's in the final version, proofreading. So that it can happen, and all this kind of slightly shifted this the language sentences. So that's also important. I would encourage you to read at least twice carefully about your manuscripts. That's before publishing. And then the other thing that many journals may involve publication fees. It's good to have that discussion with your supervisor before submission to the journal. That's make it very clear. That's with this length of the article, that may involve some kind of 2,000 euro or 1,500 US dollars. So this kind of thing. That's because this, as supervisor, I assume this is the supervisor's responsibility to pay for that. If you guys decide to submit to that journal. So with this, it's good. And you have the article published, and depending on this, your supervisor or your organization, they want to disseminate or not. That's also another thing. That's we do have this mechanism. That's when for Global Fund, when we publish that. And one more thing I forgot to mention before your submission, you need some university or that's organization may need the clearance. Make sure you have that clearance, and clearance from your supervisor and from the university. And if you list your organization as an affiliation, and make sure that you have that clearance. And some journals also ask if you cite someone's work, for example, that's you talk to me, says I have a personal opinion, and then said you would list there in the reference personal communication button down. Okay, so you need to get agreement with me first, otherwise there's people may check it later on. And also there's some journal may ask, but it's always safe to say that in the acknowledgement, people want to be acknowledged and agreed to be acknowledged. Also, that's a, and it's a lot. You cannot just prevent. There's a lot of things from happening because of this and that. That can be tricky also. So, with that, that's why I will say that we conclude this part of the session. That's a about the writing up and about submission, and address this comments from peer reviews. And I know some of you in the process now. I want to. I hope this is helpful for you. And I would.
Yes, I have a quick question. You mentioned during the manuscript writing that you strongly suggested not to copy and paste the method section that was in the proposal. So in my proposal, because I was sure that I was coming with 3 studies, so what I did, I wrote 3 method sections. So can I just copy and paste this to the manuscript, because it's not a one overall. It was like 3 method section and then 3 of everything. So that's what I did. What is your suggestion from there? Over.
In general, I would not suggest direct cut and paste, because this, even as you described clearly about that specific section of your research, I would still encourage you to look at the results section and adapt this message section, because this one manuscript should be logically linked across different sections in the manuscript. Try to make sure that something is consistent with what you want to show in the results section. Because it's not, many of these proposals may not like you. You have different methods for different sections. Usually they have one section for methods for everything. That usually it's not happy. Alina.
Yeah, hi, Button. Could you speak a little bit to author order and how to manage that maybe from the outset and throughout the process?
There's no standard answer to that.
Okay.
Of course, that's the first also, because you are the PhD candidate, you should be the first author, and really the first at the article, and your supervisor should be the last one, and all this depend on your supervisor. He or she may want to be listed second or that, but definitely the supervisor should be the correspondence author. That's the university requirement. The other authors depend on this general principle, depend on the contribution to the work. Start from the design, implementation, the data collection, and data analysis. And many co-authors, they may not participate in the early stage, but they actively participate in the manuscript preparation. That is more related to this selection of data for the results section, interpret data in the discussion section, and that kind of, and make the logic in them, that can be qualified as author, also as co-author. Different journals may have this old journals, let me put it this way, this long-standing, this old journals always have some kind of section about authors who are qualified as the author or co-author, and who are not. Actually, there's some, but there's many new journals, especially this profit-driven journals, they would not have that kind of requirement. I did have a kind of story that's a lot of this journal articles, especially on the high impact. People may argue about this being on the list of, I had the story that's China CDC published one article on New England Journal of Medicine. And the one lady within China CDC, she felt that she did all the basic work about laboratory. And she was not listed as the first author. And she committed suicide. So that can be like very serious consequence. She jumped over the building. Actually, this was very, very sad. So it, of course, may have consequence like that. That's extreme consequence and like that. But in general, that's need to look at the contributions and after different stages. It's good to have kind of agreement with your supervisor. Yes. At this stage, it's easier. Not like you are in organization. In organization, you can depend on this contribution from the colleagues and from collaborators, and we can have that. But it's for this PhD, it's easier because you have a supervisor you can really discuss with. It's no straightforward answer, no standard answer actually for that. Sorry.
Thanks, Button.